This short isthmus on the Lithuanian-Polish border is probably Russia's most desirable tactical target in Europe. After all, control of this area would allow for land communication with Russia's enclave, the Kaliningrad region. Unsurprisingly, the most extensive NATO exercises since the Cold War took place in this region in the winter. 90,000 troops, 50 warships, 80 aircrafts, and more than 1,000 ground combat vehicles. According to the legend, the Alliance troops are repelling the Russian invasion in the area. It is noteworthy that shortly before the start of the exercise, the Suwalki corridor was suddenly left without GPS satellite navigation. There was speculation online that this was the work of Russia. This may seem like a small thing, but a few years before the full-scale invasion, Russia blew up warehouses in Ukraine. More, Moscow carried out diversions in warehouses in the Czech Republic and Bulgaria, where weapons destined for Ukraine were stored. Therefore, it is likely that Russia is also preparing for a potential attack on the Suwalki Isthmus with the work of the REW. And Russia is definitely showing signals that it is preparing for such a scenario. The transfer of nuclear weapons to Belarus is nothing more than a signal to Western countries that the war will be fought on their territory. At the same time, Russia's military economy is accelerating inside the country, increasing the production of missiles. But when exactly can this happen? Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas said that Europe has 3 to 5 years to prepare for a possible military threat from Russia. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius believes a potential attack will occur in 5 to 8 years. Rob Bauer, chairman of the NATO Military Committee, requested preparations for a war with Russia in the next 20 years. And the commander-in-chief of the Dutch army, General Martin Wijnen, said that a military confrontation would begin in the near future. Of course, Putin denies such intentions. You have made up that Russia wants to attack NATO. Have you all lost your minds? Dumb as this table? This is nonsense. Bullshit. However, the Kremlin leader had previously said the same thing about Ukraine, and in this context, the Baltic states are often mentioned as Russia's next military target. After all, the Russian leadership still cannot forgive Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia for being among the first to declare independence from the USSR. In addition, Moscow fears that the Baltic Sea will become an inland sea of NATO after Finland and Sweden join the alliance. So it is likely that to open the window to Europe, Putin is ready to literally cut through it by occupying the Baltic states, as Stalin once did. To strengthen their defense, the Baltic states are going to build 600 bunkers on the border with Russia. Most of them will be located in southeastern Estonia. So it is evident that these countries are preparing for a direct land invasion. Do you believe in this scenario? Write about it in the comments and like this video if you share our concerns. A military operation on the side of the Russian Federation could be as large-scale as in the case of Ukraine. The Daily Mail, citing former US Army Commander Ben Hodges, has published a possible scenario for a Russian attack on NATO. The first step would be cyber attacks that would provoke global infrastructure and satellite outages. Next, Russia could use hundreds of long-range missiles against civilian targets in Europe, primarily airfields, naval bases, and logistics centers. The third step would be a ground operation. First, an attempt to capture the Suwalki corridor. After these assaults, Russia may pause to assess the situation. However, some argue that Russia's goal may not be to cut through the corridor as such, but to blackmail the United States into negotiating and starting a dialogue. Either the United States agrees to Russian ultimatums, which primarily involve pushing back NATO's borders to the level of the '97 border, or Russia continues its offensive. But does Russia have enough power for such an operation? On the one hand, Russia is still ahead of European NATO countries regarding tanks, artillery systems, and jet aircraft, but not in terms of quality. In addition, after the invasion of Ukraine, Putin is unlikely to be under the illusion that the Russian army will defeat the NATO army. He may be counting on the fact that the alliance will be afraid to use Article 5, which considers an attack on one member state to be an attack on all. In addition, it should be understood that military aggression may not necessarily begin with the invasion of regular Russian troops. It could be unmarked units of soldiers, as in Crimea in 2014. In such a scenario, the response to such aggression may not be as harsh. Another goal of Russia at the outbreak of a possible conflict could be to push the United States out of Europe. Here, the Kremlin is probably pinning its hopes on Donald Trump's election victory. In 2020, Trump told European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen that if Europe is under military attack, the United States will not come to its aid, that NATO is dead, and even threatened to withdraw from the alliance. Obviously, Putin will be looking for a window of opportunity to implement such a plan, just as he did with the annexation of Crimea when he took advantage of the destabilization of Ukraine. For example, this year's elections in the United States could be one of the likely options when a political vacuum will arise in the country for some time. Suppose the election results provoke events inside the United States, such as the storming of the Capitol or tensions on the border with Mexico. In that case, the United States would not be concerned about what was happening in Europe, and Putin could take advantage of this. Therefore, even the unlikely prospect of fighting Russia without American support has forced European leaders to accelerate military preparations. After all, over the past 30 years, European countries' armies have been shrinking. Only 11 of the 31 member states of the alliance, primarily those bordering Russia or Ukraine, have reached the 2% of GDP defense spending target set in 2006. Thus, experts estimate that Europe will need 5 to 10 years to strengthen its military-industrial base. Yet, the EU and NATO countries can avoid such scenarios if they provide Ukraine with all the necessary weapons right now. As long as Ukraine is engaged in active hostilities, Russia will likely not dare open a second front, especially against NATO. However, a direct military aggression by Russia is far from the only way by which it can threaten Europe. In its arsenal, there are many other methods, including sabotage involving employees of the main intelligence directorate, as well as fomenting tensions between countries and hotspots. In this context, it is particularly worth mentioning the situation in the Balkans, where a war raged in the 1990s. This is Kosovo. It is part of the former Yugoslavia. In 2008, the Kosovo government declared independence for the region, which was recognized by most NATO countries. However, despite its defeat in the Yugoslav wars of the 1990s, Serbia still considers Kosovo its territory, although 94% of the region's population is ethnic Albanian and only about 2% is Serbian. That is why more than 4,000 NATO peacekeepers are currently deployed in Kosovo. Because there is such constant tension in the region, the latest such precedent occurred in the village of Banska in northern Kosovo. It is about 10 miles from the Serbian border. In September of last year, an event occurred that almost caused a new war in the Balkans. It happened on this very bridge. Several dozen armed men blocked the entrance to the village and opened fire on the police. One of the policemen was killed.
Some of the weapons were produced 6 weeks before the attack. So this is exactly what Serbia has learned from Russia and where Serbia hopes to have the support from Russia, because Serbia is the only country in Europe that is still not implementing the sanctions against Russia, that has still the airspace open for Russia, where you can find in institutions of Serbia, even in the defense ministry, you can find officially Russians working for the state, for the government of Serbia.
Kosovo's position is that it was an organized provocation to accuse the local authorities of killing Serbs. But whose plan were these militants fulfilling?
We have footages of them training in an official barracks of Army of Serbia with weapons and armored vehicles belonging to Army of Serbia. Around 100 terrorists, heavily armed, supported by Serbia financially, logistically, professionally, militarily, attempted to imitate or to copy the scenario of Donbass in 2014.
These groups, this group and these groups, because there are more than one group, are replicating what Russia did in Crimea and in Ukraine. Like they are kind of little green men units that are supported by Serbian government in order to cause problems and instability in northern part of our country, with the final aim, final goal to separate 4 northern municipalities from Kosovo and join them to Serbia.
If this plan was not thwarted, Serbia could have come to the defense of its ethnic citizens in Kosovo. Doesn't that sound familiar? as Russia used the same pretext, the alleged protection of a part of the population, to invade Ukraine back in 2014, annexing Crimea and occupying Donbas.
Там проживают русские люди.
Russian people live there. They are in danger. We cannot give up on them. Earlier, in 2008, Moscow implemented a similar scenario in Georgia, which resulted in the occupation of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And even earlier, with Moldova creating the so-called Transnistria. Before launching military aggression, Russia always relies on its distorted version of history. They're trying to do the same in the Balkans. The war in this region was one of the bloodiest episodes in European history. Back in the 1990s, it cost the lives of more than 100,000 people: Bosnians, Croats, Serbs, and Kosovo Albanians. Ethnic cleansing began in Kosovo until NATO intervened by launching an air campaign. It is this so-called Kosovo precedent that Putin uses to justify his aggression against Ukraine.
Putin's Russia is interested in having a second, a third, a fourth hotspot so that the West cannot be focused on helping Ukraine.
These are the Russian tricolors and Z markings painted on the walls in Kosovo's northern towns and villages. This particular sign became a symbol of Russia's invasion of Ukraine after the Z markings were painted on Russian military equipment to indicate the direction of deployment of military units.
The Z signs in Serbia and earlier in the north of Kosovo, it is very clear a mix about the feelings towards Russia, the refusing of the West, and the wish to have Russia to win this war, in the hope that with a strong Russia, Serbia will be able to have a successful implementation of their hegemonic aims in the Western Balkans.
And this is the result of the work of local propaganda. That's what they say in this newsroom in Kosovo's capital.
Here, and in particular people working with fact-checking. Valdet here, who studied in Canada for production, for example, is working on a fact-checking program looking at the Russian propaganda in Western Balkans, how the Russian propaganda is spread in Serbia, Kosovo, Montenegro, and Bosnia-Herzegovina. He's just come back from these 4 countries doing a program on Russian propaganda.
You have not misheard. It was Russian propaganda.
Russian propaganda spreads in Kosovo too through the Serbian channels, largely. We have Serbian agencies which have been formed, new Serbian media which has formed since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and they are being supported by basically state money in Serbia.
This is also a similar story to Ukraine's.
They tell in international conferences that Kosovo is non-existent, like Ukraine should not exist, that in Kosovo you have Nazis who are ruling, and that in Kosovo you have a genocide and pogrom against the Serbs.
Serbia regularly conducts military exercises near the border, and the military bases are stocked with weapons purchased from Russia and left over from the war in Yugoslavia in the 1990s.
The presence of Russia in Serbia is also physically. They have 64 kilometers from our borderline, one center that they called Russian Humanitarian Center, which they cover, we think that they cover intel activities by conducting kind of training for emergency agencies, which we think that also played a role on preparation of this group that conducted the terrorist attack on our northern municipalities.
According to the Kosovo government, Serbia's political intention is to become a hegemon in the Balkans, actually restoring the former Yugoslavia, just as Putin's goal is to recreate the Soviet Union. And the main way that both countries want to achieve their intentions is through the military. For Russia, this is quite strategic goals for confronting the West.
The main goal of Russia in Balkans is access to Adriatic Sea, and from there to Mediterranean and to energy sources in the Middle East. This was a historical friction that happened between Russian Federation and Western allies. in our history, like Western part trying to deny access of Russia in the Mediterranean and Adriatic Sea, and their, we can say, determination to continue to work on having access to Adriatic Sea.
Thus, Russia is interested in both the political destabilization of the region and the expansion of its territorial influence. To exacerbate the situation, Russia will try to act covertly and continue to organize provocations. If you empathize with the fate of Kosovo as much as we do, please like the video. What conclusions can we draw from this analysis? If earlier a war between Russia and NATO was considered impossible, now the countdown to it has actually begun. This indicates that the West has finally realized that Putin does not need any adequate reason to invade another country. Each new war he starts raises the stakes, and after a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, escalating the military scenario in the Balkans, or even a direct attack on NATO fits this logic. Watch another video from our channel about the military scenarios between China and Taiwan. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video if you like our analytics.